وصلواته وسلامه على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. الحمد لله على النعمة الإسلام وكفى بها نعمة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as was mentioned earlier, for a wisdom has brought a lot of Muslims to the West. And the topic that I was given was to talk about the role of Muslims in the West. And I want to just take a little historical excursion and make it as quick as possible because I've given a limited amount of time to talk about a subject that is rather extensive. If we look at the history of the West has two dominant influences. And before it was called the Judeo-Christian culture, which was actually a name that was given not that long ago, it was called the Greco-Roman culture. And it's important to understand a people. You have to understand where they came from, what the backgrounds of those people are, what their philosophies are, and these type of things. So it's important in understanding the Western people is to understand where they came from. The Greco-Roman civilization are two distinct civilizations, the Greek and the Roman. And I don't want to go into the Greek, but I have more emphasis a little bit on the Roman. And it's interesting that in the Arabic language, the word Ar-Rom, which is used in Surah Ar-Rom, is a word that generally has been given the meaning of the Europeans. When the Arabs say Ar-Romi, they mean a European, somebody from Europe. Does not specifically mean the Greeks, nor does it specifically mean the Italians, who were called Romans based on their capital being in the city of Rome. They're a very fascinating people, the Romans. They had a distinct quality in that they were a rather tolerant colonizer. And tyrants can be tolerant. They're not always butchers, they're not always slaughterers. But the Romans would go and they would colonize people, and what they would do, instead of opposing those people, instead of subduing and subjugating them in a humiliating way, they would often honor their religion, honor their gods. This is something they did to the Jews, unlike the Greeks, who were traditionally known to be rather what's termed now quote-unquote anti-Semitic. The Romans, on the contrary, actually honored many of the Jewish people. They gave them titles. They would allow them to become Roman citizens. This created a faction within the Jewish people themselves. There were Jewish people that were very anti-Roman, and there were other Jewish groups within the communities that were pro-Roman. And you can see this debate and these tensions being worked out in the gospel narrations that exist to this day. And this was something that was happening at that time and continued to happen for quite some time, until the Romans eventually adopted, or rather redacted, the religion of the Nazarenes, of the Nasara, according to the Quran, which is Christianity. But again, they redacted it and changed it. This change took place based on the fact that the Christians who were dispersed from Judea, from Galilee and these areas, and literally spread out in what was then known as the Roman Empire. And they lived amongst the Romans, and for 3 centuries there was a great deal of persecution. And despite the fact that they were persecuted, they maintained their religion, which was very impressive. Because of the fact that they were being persecuted, they maintained their religion. After a very short period of time, though, there begins to be a change, and the change has very specific sociological and historical reasons. The Romans began to adopt the religion of the Christians. There were massive alterations that were done, but this is something beside the fact. The fact is that they began to adopt a religion of a Semitic people, because the first Christians were Semitic, a religion of a Semitic people that was completely alien to them, and they not only did they not previously adopt that religion with rare exception, but they looked down on those people as being inferior to them. The Romans were an extremely arrogant people. They considered these people inferior to them. So it's a fascinating historical fact that these people who saw a people as less than them began to adopt their religion. The dominant reason that's given is the deep social discordance that existed in the Roman Empire at that time. These people had literally gone from their civilization to a state of gross barbarity. They were having orgies. Their sexual promiscuity was beyond belief. They were literally killing people. They were watching people die as a sport, as an enjoyment. And I would liken this to the violent films and these things. Well, although it is fantasy up to a point, Nonetheless, these people have actually come to enjoy watching very grossly violent films. This is a modern phenomenon, but it has its precedent in this Roman sickness of enjoying watching blood sport. So this is something that the modern Romans have again started to do. They enjoy seeing the spilling of blood, and they actually get excited through this. They also enjoy watching orgies. They enjoy watching pornography. In last year became a greater money winner than what they call dominant media, which from an Islamic point of view is still pornographic. The quote-unquote dominant media, which has now been overstripped by the pornographic industry. They're both, from an Islamic perspective, pornographic, but what they would term hardcore pornography is now making more money for the media industry than their what they call family entertainment. This is very significant for the Muslims. These people have entered into a state of decay, a social decay, an ethical, spiritual, and moral decay that is unprecedented in recent history, but yet we can see its analogies in the Roman period. And this is the point at which Christianity became to be adopted, because it was literally a movement that called to a deep spirituality. The Christians, despite the fact that their aqidah, as we would look at it today, their creed, their charisma was grossly distorted. Nonetheless, they had a very high ethical standard, and they had a social morality that was deeply impressive to people that were recognizing that their societies were in crisis. And this is important for the Muslims to remember this, because already there is happening within these cultures movements to counter-oppose this massive disintegration of their societies, because they recognize and they know that literally the cries of their death cries are taking place now. They know that if they continue on the path that they are on, that their societies will completely disintegrate within a very short period, and we are witnessing this in our lifetime. So where does this place the Muslims? The Muslims, unfortunately, are an ummah, and I don't want to go into we have this constant, is almost a sadistic tendency to repeat how pathetic we've become, the pathetic conditions, despite the fact that our situation is unbelievable and it's unprecedented historically. Nonetheless, the Muslim peoples, as a peoples, are the only peoples that still have certain things intact within their societies. The Muslim family is the only family, with the exception of very small Aboriginal communities and rural communities in different countries, the Muslim family is the only family that is maintaining a semblance of integrity in the entire world. Not simply the Western Hemisphere, but in the rest of the world. The family is disintegrating before our eyes, and the family is the essence of any social society. No society can endure without the essential element of family being maintained, the integrity of the family maintained. And this is why the Sharia of Islam, the foundational element of Sharia, is the preservation of the family, to preserve the family, to allow for a fitrah nature, not only to be nurtured within the family, but to be preserved for the next generation. كل مولود ولد على الفطرة فإن أبواه يهودانه أو ينصرانه أو يمجسانه فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله. This is what the Prophet ﷺ recited after he gave this hadith, that every child is born on fitrah, and we should never forget this. This includes the children of the English, the children of the French, the children of the Americans, every kullu mawludin wulida ala al-fitrah. The fitrah is the inherent internal nature of the human being, which is to be in a natural inclination towards submission and towards the recognition of a cause behind every event. And the ultimate cause behind the event of creation is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed it into existence. Every child recognizes that there is a reason, and this is why the dominant question of children is why? Why is this so? Why is this that? Why is it this color? Why did that happen? A child wants to know why, and the ultimate why is, why are we here? Why are we here? Why have we been placed on the earth? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us reasons in the Quran. The first and primary reason, مَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah had only created the jinn, the sprite world, and the human world except to worship Allah. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said, to know Allah, for knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second purpose, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. He is the one who created you in order to test you. لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ. Al-lam here is what they call ta'leel, is to indicate that this is a purpose for our creation, is to test and to try us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that He tries us with بِالشَّرِّ وَبِالْخَيْرِ, with good and with evil and with good. We are tested in both ways. Fitna, as a fitna, both ways are tested. So the human being is tested with affliction of both good and both evil, and we need to understand this as Muslims. Our adab, according to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, جُعِلَ عَذَابُ أُمَّتِي فِي دُنْيَاهَا. The adab of our ummah is in this world. So we should not be constantly horrified at the condition of the Muslim. This is a reflection of our own internal states. Allah is purifying this ummah. In reality, عَسَىٰ تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. The tribulations of the Muslims are a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that our purification is in this world and not in the next world. Alhamdulillah. Because the adab of dunya khalidun fiha abada. The people of the next world, they will be eternally in a punishment. So the punishment of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years is nothing in comparison to this. And this is clear in Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the great Imam of Egypt, when he was on his horse and one Jewish man stopped him and he said, Ya Imam, هل أنتم الذين تقولون أن نبيكم صلى الله عليه وسلم قال الدنيا سجن المؤمن وجنة كافر. And this Jewish man was a zayyat, he was an oil keeper. And his robe was messed up and he was a poor man. And Ibn Hajar said, we say that our Prophet ﷺ said, the dunya is the prison of the mu'min and the Jannah, the paradise of the kafir. And the Jewish man looked at this Imam in his beautiful robes on his horse with the izzah of the Muslims. وَالْعِزَّةُ لِلَّهِ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. This man had the izzah of the Muslims, and the Jewish man said, what type of prison are you in and what type of paradise am I in? Ibn Hajar, with the ilham of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, طَأْطَأَ رَأْسَهُ. He lowered his head and then he raised it, looked to the sky and then looked at this man and he said, Wallahi, لما أتأمل ما أعد الله لي لإسلامي وإحساني من نعيم إنني لأرى أنني في السجن في هذه الدنيا ولما أتفكر فيما أعد لك من العذاب بكفرك وبعدك عن الله سبحانه وتعالى وإنكارك لرسوله إنك لفي الجنة في هذه الدنيا. He said, when I think about the thing that Allah has promised me in the akhirah and I compare it to what I'm in this world, I can only come to the conclusion that this world is a prison. And when I think of the punishment that Allah has prepared for you in the next world because of your rejection of Allah and His Messenger and your obstinance, I can only come to the conclusion that you are in paradise now compared to what awaits you. This is the understanding of the Muslims, the relative reality of existence, that things are relative and we have to have the big perspective. This is the gift of Islam, this is the gift of the one that recites the Quran and reflects on its meaning, is recognizing these things. And so we have to understand the relative state of our condition. The tribulation that the Muslims are in, إِذَا اللَّهَ أَرَادَ لِعَبْدًا خَيْرًا عَجَّلَ لَهُ عُقُوبَةَ ذَنْبِهِ فِي دُنْيَاهُ. This is a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, if Allah wants good for his slave, then he will punish him for his wrong action in this world and not in the next world. So we should see all of this as purification. When the Quran sends down the great message of when we were afflicted with a musibah, قد أصبتم مثليها قلتم أن هذا قل هو من عند أنفسكم. When an affliction, a calamity afflicted you and you had already afflicted them with the likes of it and twice, you said, where's this affliction coming from? The Prophet is commanded to say to all of us, every single moment until the end of time, قل هو من عند أنفسكم. This affliction is from your own self. And so we have to recognize who we are and why we're in the condition we're in, and we should say Alhamdulillah wa shukrulillah ala kulli hal. Alhamdulillah wa shukrulillah ala kulli hal. كَفَى بِالْإِسْلَامِ نِعْمَةً. This blessing of Islam is a ni'mah. Now where is this in relation to all of where we are in the Muslim world? In the West, we have a position here. We are literally ambassadors of Islam. And we have betrayed the trust that the Prophet ﷺ gave to us. We have betrayed this trust. When you see the Muslims, the Yemenis who traveled all over the world building dhikr stores, literally dhikr stores everywhere and inviting people to drink from the fresh drink of Tawheed. And these now we see, in my city where I live, 80% of the liquor stores are owned by Arab Muslims. 80% of the liquor stores, and they are in black communities amongst the poor and the oppressed. And these are the same people. These are the grandchildren of those people that spread the light of Islam. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing here? When a brother, an African-American imam in the city of East Palo Alto that has the highest murder rate in the United States per capita, when he wanted to make because of alcohol is the #1 cause of murder in the United States, al-Khaba'ith. When he wanted to make protests against the liquor stores, there were Muslims in that mosque that opposed him because their friends that they ate with owned those liquor stores. This is the state, you see. Now we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? We have to ask ourselves this question. And I don't have time to explain it, so I'm just going to quickly say just a few things then. The first thing is that we should get out of this state of ghurur. We should get out of this state of delusion. Ghurur. لا يغرنك بالله الغرور. Don't be deluded by the deluder. The Muslims, we are the closest ummah to Bani Israel. The danger of this statement that the Prophet ﷺ gave us is, what is the disease of Bani Israel? That we're Sha'bullah al-Mukhtar. We're the chosen people. Chosen simply because we were born into a state of ethnicity that is not shared by the rest of humanity. The Muslim should not be deluded into thinking that Islam is some kind of birthright that you're born into, and simply because your name is Abdurrahman or Khadija or whatever, that this makes you a Muslim. We should get out of this deception. When Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu sent Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas to Qadisiyah, and this is one of the determining battles of the Muslims. When he sent him, he told him, Ya Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, لا يغرنك أن يقال خال رسول الله فإن الله لا يمحو السيء بالسيء ولكنه يمحو السيء بالحسن وليس بين الله وبين أحد نسب إلا بطاعته. He said, Oh Sa'ad Ibn Abi Waqqas, don't be deluded in that people say that you're the uncle, the maternal uncle of the Messenger of Allah. Don't be deluded by this. And we should not be deluded the fact that we are Muslims or that our grandfather was a scholar from Kashmir or from wherever. I hear this so much from Muslims, oh, my grandfather was a scholar. Don't tell me about your grandfather. What are you? Who are you? تلك الأمم قد خلت لها ما كسبت. What are you and where are you and what are you doing? This is what we should ask ourselves, who we are. We have talked about the glory of the past. Let's forget the glory of the past. The glory of the past is delusion for us because it's the earnings of those who went before us. It's not our earnings. We don't eat from their plates. We eat from the plates that we make. From the food that we prepare in this world, we will eat in the next world either sweet fruit of Iman or the bitter fruit of Nifaq. But it's our choice. And then he said that there's no nasab, there's no relationship between a slave and between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this way. And Allah does not wipe out a bad deed with another bad deed, but He wipes out a bad deed with a good deed. آمرك ومن معك أن تكونوا أشد احتراسا من عدوك. I warn you that you should be أشد احتراسا منكم من عدوكم, that you should be more concerned about your own condition than the condition of your enemies. Subhanallah. Reflect on this meaning. You should be more concerned about your own condition than the conditions of your enemies. The disease of the munafiqun, يحسبون ويحسبون كل صيحة عليهم. They think that every little thing is against them. No, think about who you are. Think about what you are. Think about what you have to offer. Don't think about what's being done out there. All of that is either tribulation from Allah or a blessing. There's nothing else. If harm comes to us, it's a tribulation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's how we should see it. So this is what Umar radiallahu anhu is saying to this man. Don't be concerned so much about your enemy. Be concerned about your own state. فَإِنَّ ذُنُوبَ الْجَيْشِ أَخْوَفُ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ عَدُوِّهِمْ. Because the wrong actions of this army of the Muslims is more dangerous than the power of the armies that they're fighting of their enemies. وَإِنَّمَا يُنْصَرَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ بِمَعْصِيَةِ عَدُوِّهِمْ لِلَّهِ. And the Muslims are given victory based on the disobedience of their enemies. This is where the secret of the victory of the Muslims is, on the disobedience of the enemies that they're fighting in their distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَوْلَا ذَلِكَ لَمْ تَكُنْ لَنَا بِهِمْ قُوَّةٌ لِأَنَّ عَدَدَنَا لَيْسَ كَعَدَدِهِمْ وَعُدَّتُنَا لَيْسَتْ كَعُدَّتِهِمْ. Because our numbers are not like their numbers. They outnumber us. They have always outnumbered us. Our numbers are not like their numbers. And our udda, our strength and power, is not like their strength and power. This is Umar ibn al-Khattab, al-Faruq. The one that the Prophet ﷺ said about him, if there was a prophet after me, it would have been Umar. فإن استوينا في المعصية فإن لهم الفضل علينا. If we become equal in disobedience to Allah, then they have the fadl, they have the preference over us في القوة, in strength. وإن لا ننصر عليهم بفضلنا لم نغلبهم بقوتنا. If we are not given victory over them by our preference, by our spiritual, ethical, moral superiority, then we will never defeat them with military strength and power. ولا تقولوا إن عدونا شر منا فلن يسلط علينا فرب قوم سلط من هو شر منه كما سلط على بني إسرائيل لما عملوا بمعاصي الله كفار المجوس فجاسوا خلال الديار وكان وعدا مفعولا. And don't say that your enemy is worse than you and therefore they could never become over us. This is at a time when the Muslims knew nothing of victory. All they knew was victory. They didn't know defeat. And now we know the truth of Umar's statement. Don't say that because they're worse than you, they'll never have strength and power and overcome you. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give strength and power to those who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يَعْبُدُونِي لَا يُشْرِكُونَ بِيَ شَيْئًا. This is the state and condition that is a necessity for tamkeen in the earth. When we saw in Afghanistan, shurut al-nasr tawaffarat. They had the conditions of victory over their enemy. But shurut al-tamkeen is not the same as shurut al-nasr. The conditions of being established in the earth is not the same as the conditions of victory over the kuffar. And those conditions did not exist. And this is the theme that has been taken, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. This is the sickness that we have, wallahi, is not ikhtilaf. The sickness that we have is that we do not know the adab of ikhtilaf. We don't know the adab of ikhtilaf. We have lost the courtesies of disagreeing. Wallahi, there was a time in this ummah when Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu would sit with atheists, with mulhideen, and he would dialogue with them in the presence of Muslims with waqar and sakina, and he would convince them of the truth of Islam. The Muslims were never afraid to debate the non-Muslims, and yet now today we're unable to simply sit at a table together and speak with the adab and the courtesy of silence, of letting somebody finish what they have to say before we cut them off, of just showing off and impressing each other with things that we've memorized and these type of things. Imam Malik, he used to say, لَيْسَ الْعِلْمُ كَثْرَةَ الرِّوَايَاتِ وَإِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ نُورٌ جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ بِقَلْبِ الْمُؤْمِنِ. Knowledge is not having lots of narrations and lots of memorizations. Knowledge is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in the heart of the mu'min. And this is the light that needs to be replaced. This is the light that needs to be recharged. And this is the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this light is the light of wahi. And when we return to the wahi of Allah, or we move forward with the wahi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will be given victory. We will see people entering into the deen in these countries afwaja. When we clean up our neighborhoods, wallahi, in this country, where are the dirtiest areas? I just ask you that. Go into the mosque, look at our mosque, look at how we treat the Quran, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to change ourselves. We need to elevate ourselves. And the most important elevation of the self is the elevation of our intellects. This is the light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Nurun ala nur, wahyun ala al-aql. This is the light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, that He ennobled Bani Adam. لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا Bani Adam. The Bani Adam was ennobled with the intellect, but when it's imbued with the light of wahi, then you see transformations, you see miracles, you see changes, you see progression, you see moving forward to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you see people being raised up in darajat. The community in England, we must build institutions here. We must get our children into schools. This is the most important thing at this point. You must get your children out of these state schools and into schools where they can be raised and nurtured. If they have a problem with saying Islamic school, we don't have to have Islamic on there. One of the things they say that كل يدعي وصول الليل والليلة لا تقرهم بذاك. Everyone claims to have arrived to Layla, and Layla doesn't let their claims be confirmed. You see, we all say madrasa Islamiyya. Let's get rid of the Islamiyya and just make a madrasa and make it Islamic. So we don't have to put in a pedage or a name there. It has the reality of Islam, like Hassan al-Basri, كان الإسلام اسما كان تصوف اسمه حقيقة بلا اسم والآن أصبح اسم بلا حقيقة. That in the time of the companions, the idea of purification of the self was a name, was a reality without a name, and now it's become a name without a reality. So let us get rid of all these claims and simply do the job at hand. Get out there into the ditches, get into the trenches. We have a serious problem. The youth in this country are completely disenfranchised. They feel alienated from the Muslims. They feel, and this is ripe for demagogic type of movements, for people coming up and stirring up the rabble and getting people joining fanatical fringe groups, people that have no fiqh in deen. If you see people talking about Islam, you say, Hatu burhanakum, let me see, where did you study? Who did you learn from? Where's your fiqh from? Fiqh is understanding. If you have no fiqh, then shut up. Wallahi, if you have no fiqh, then shut up. Because wallahi, fi sukuti salama. Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu kana yaqulu, إذا كنتم جليس قوما فكن أسكتهم فإن أصابوا كنت من ضمنهم وإن أخطأوا سلمت من خطائهم. If you're sitting with the people, be the most silent of them. Because if they are sound in what they're saying, you're from amongst them, you get that reward. And if they make mistakes, then you don't share in the mistakes they make. We have to learn our own place. We have to know who we are. There's no, this opinion, everybody has an opinion in Islam. There's called Ahl al-Ra'i wal-Aqd. People of opinion are people who have learned and mastered their nafs and mastered certain sciences before they can start presenting opinions and things like this. And we have to recognize that. Go out and struggle. If you want to have an opinion, then I warn you about that. The Prophet ﷺ said at the end of time that there would be people, إِعْجَابُ كُلِّ ذِي رَأْيٍ بِرَأْيِهِ. That this would be the age, everybody impressed with their opinions. So I just, wallahi, being here and seeing the situation of many of it's tragic. If in a previous times, the only thing I can say, if a handful of tabi'een came to this country with the same opportunity to speak with the same freedom, the only thing the Prophet ﷺ wanted in Mecca was the opportunity to speak to people without obstruction. This is the only thing that he wanted. And all of us have this opportunity in these countries. We have the abilities to speak to people without obstruction, and despite that, we are our own obstruction. We are the greatest barrier between Islam coming to these people. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله. And excuse me if I said anything that my intention was not to offend anybody. وجزاكم الله خير والسلام.